A single soldier steps out from cover, hoists a weapon onto his shoulder, and turns a 50-ton steel monster into a burning coffin in less than 3 seconds. No recoil, no warning, just a flash of fire and a tank crew's worst nightmare made real. This is the story of a weapon that shouldn't exist, built by engineers who broke every rule of physics they'd been taught and changed the face of modern warfare so completely that armies around the world are still using its descendants today. But here's what nobody tells you. The first time American soldiers fired this weapon in combat, they almost didn't believe it had actually worked. We're talking about the M1 Recoilless Rifle, a weapon so revolutionary that when military observers first saw it demonstrated, they accused the engineers of using trick photography. Because what this weapon could do violated everything everyone thought they knew about how guns worked. To understand why this weapon was so shocking, you need to understand the problem it solved. And that problem was written in blood across every battlefield of World War II. It's 1943. American infantry are advancing through North Africa, through Sicily, through the nightmare hedgerows of Normandy. And they keep running into the same terrifying situation: enemy tanks. Massive German armor that can destroy entire squads with a single shot, impervious to rifle fire, seemingly unstoppable. And American infantrymen have almost nothing that can fight back. They have bazookas, sure, but bazookas are short-range, temperamental, and often bounce off the thick armor of German Panthers and Tigers. They have anti-tank guns, artillery pieces that can kill tanks effectively, but here's the problem. Those guns weigh hundreds of pounds, require entire crews to operate, and most critically, they recoil violently when fired. That recoil isn't just uncomfortable, it's tactical suicide. Every time an anti-tank gun fires, it jumps backwards several feet from the sheer force of the explosion. The gun crew has to re-aim, reposition, and in those precious seconds, they're completely vulnerable. And everyone within 100 yards knows exactly where you are because of the massive backblast and dust cloud. Enemy tanks can spot you, target you, and kill you before you get a second shot off. So soldiers face an impossible choice: engage the tank and probably die, or hide and watch your fellow infantrymen get slaughtered. American military engineers study this problem and realize they need something that doesn't exist: a weapon powerful enough to destroy tanks, light enough for a few soldiers to carry, accurate enough to hit from a safe distance, and most impossibly, something that doesn't give away your position when you fire it. The solution they're looking for seems to violate fundamental physics. When you fire a gun, Newton's third law says, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. The explosive force propelling the shell forward creates recoil pushing backward. That's not a design flaw, that's physics. You can't cheat it, you can't ignore it. Or can you? Enter Commander Crosby, a U.S. Navy officer who's been obsessing over an idea that everyone else thinks is insane. He's studied reports from World War I about experimental weapons. He's read obscure technical papers from European designers who played with unconventional gun designs. And he's convinced that you can eliminate recoil entirely if you're willing to think about guns in a completely different way. His idea is almost stupidly simple in concept. What if, instead of containing all the explosive force and directing it forward through the barrel, you deliberately let half of it escape backward? Equal force forward and backward means zero net recoil. The gun doesn't move. The shooter doesn't get knocked over. You've just cheated Newton. The military brass hear this proposal and think he's lost his mind. Let explosive gases escape backward? That's how you kill everyone standing behind the weapon. That's how you create a death trap, not a useful gun. But Crosby is persistent. He builds crude prototypes, runs test after test, and slowly proves that with the right design, you can direct those backward gases safely, create a weapon with zero recoil, and give infantry soldiers something they've never had before: portable tank-killing power. The military, desperate for anything that might work, gives him permission to develop a full-scale version. And if you're fascinated by hidden World War II secrets like this, make sure to like the video, because what Crosby's team creates next will redefine what a shoulder-fired weapon can do. The design they settle on looks alien compared to conventional guns. Picture a long tube, open at both ends. No traditional barrel, no closed breech. The front end tapers slightly to stabilize the shell as it exits. The rear end flares out into a venturi nozzle, a carefully calculated opening that lets explosive gases escape in a controlled manner. When you fire this weapon, here's what happens. The shell sits in the middle of the tube with its propellant charge. You pull the trigger. The propellant ignites. Explosive gases expand in all directions. Half the gases push the shell forward out the front of the tube at high velocity. The other half escape backward through the venturi nozzle, creating a spectacular blast of fire and gas that shoots out behind the weapon. The forces perfectly balance. Forward momentum equals backward momentum. Net recoil on the weapon itself? Practically zero. A soldier can hold this weapon on his shoulder, fire a shell capable of penetrating tank armor, and the weapon doesn't budge. It sounds impossible. It looks impossible when you see it for the first time, but it works. The first combat-ready version, designated the M1 Recoilless Rifle, starts reaching American troops in late 1944. It fires a 57mm shell, weighs only 45 pounds, and can be operated by a two-man team. Compare that to a conventional anti-tank gun of similar power, which weighs over 400 pounds and requires a crew of 4 or 5. But the 57mm, while effective against lighter armor, isn't powerful enough to reliably kill the heaviest German tanks. So engineers immediately start scaling up. They create the M20, a 75mm version that fires a shell with devastating penetrating power. This weapon weighs 115 pounds, still light enough for 2 or 3 soldiers to carry, and it can punch through several inches of hardened steel armor. Then they go even bigger. The M27, chambered in 105mm, becomes one of the most powerful man-portable anti-tank weapons in the world. This beast weighs 385 pounds, requires a crew to move it, but it can destroy any tank in existence from ranges where the tank can barely see you. American soldiers start calling these weapons reckless rifles because using them requires nerves of steel. Remember, when you fire, a massive blast of flame and gas erupts from the rear of the weapon. Anyone standing within 30 feet behind the shooter is in the danger zone. The backblast can kill at close range, seriously injure anyone nearby, and at minimum will knock down anyone unfortunate enough to be in the wrong place. Crews learn to carefully check their six before firing. They learn to position themselves so the backblast goes into empty space, not toward their fellow soldiers. They learn never to fire from inside an enclosed space because the pressure wave will kill everyone in the room, including the shooter. But once you understand these limitations, once you master the weapon, you have something extraordinary. You can set up a firing position, camouflaged and hidden, wait for an enemy tank to come into range, fire one perfect shot that turns the tank into a funeral pyre. And here's the crucial part: the enemy has no idea where you fired from. Conventional guns create a massive pressure wave, a shock wave that radiates outward from the muzzle. That wave kicks up dust, shakes vegetation, and basically puts up a giant sign saying, "I'm right here." The recoilless rifle doesn't create that same distinctive signature. The backblast is spectacular, sure, but it's directional, going behind the weapon, and the sound signature is different from a conventional gun. Tank commanders scanning for threats find it incredibly difficult to locate where the shot came from. This means you can fire, displace to a new position, and fire again before the enemy even figures out they're under attack. Conventional anti-tank gun crews fire once and then have to run for their lives. Recoilless rifle crews can engage multiple targets. But how exactly does a shell from this weapon tear through tank armor that's designed to resist conventional rounds? The answer lies in the ammunition, and this is where the weapon becomes truly deadly. The M20 recoilless rifle fires a shaped charge warhead called HEAT, High Explosive Anti-Tank. This isn't just an explosive shell that relies on kinetic energy to punch through armor. This is something far more sophisticated and far more destructive. Inside the shell is a copper cone, precisely machined, positioned in front of the explosive charge. When the shell hits the target, the explosive detonates. The blast wave hits the copper cone and inverts it, turning it inside out at incredible velocity. The copper doesn't melt, it vaporizes and is driven forward as a superheated jet of metal traveling at speeds exceeding 25,000 feet per second. This jet is narrow, focused, and so energetic that it doesn't just penetrate armor, it burns through it like a cutting torch through butter. The jet punches a small hole, but that's just the beginning. Behind the initial jet comes the explosive force, blasting through the hole, entering the tank's interior, where it becomes a pressure wave of superheated gas, shrapnel, and vaporized metal. Inside the tank, this is absolute hell. The pressure wave alone can kill the crew. The shrapnel tears through everything. Fuel ignites. Ammunition cooks off. What was a functioning war machine becomes a death trap in milliseconds. And the soldier who fired the shot? Already moving to a new position, ready to engage the next target. Let's go to the front lines and see what this looked like in actual combat, because the stories from soldiers who used these weapons read like something from a movie. It's December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's thrown everything into one last desperate offensive, trying to split the Allied forces and capture the port of Antwerp. German panzer divisions crash through American lines in the Ardennes forest, catching Allied forces by surprise. Among the attackers are King Tiger tanks, the most heavily armored vehicles ever built, nearly immune to most American anti-tank weapons. An American infantry unit finds itself cut off, surrounded, with German armor approaching through the snow-covered forest. They have one M20 recoilless rifle. The crew sets up in a hastily dug position, partially concealed by a destroyed building. They can hear the tanks before they see them, the grinding of treads, the roar of engines. The first King Tiger emerges from the tree line, massive and terrifying, its 88mm gun capable of destroying anything the Americans have. The recoilless rifle crew holds their breath. Waits. The tank gets closer. 300 yards, 200, 150. The gunner centers the sights on the side armor, where it's thinnest. Calls out, "Back clear," to make sure no one's behind the weapon. Squeezes the trigger. The weapon barely moves. The backblast erupts behind them, melting snow for 30 feet. The shell covers the distance in a fraction of a second, hits the tank's side armor. The shaped charge detonates. For a moment, nothing seems to happen. Then smoke starts pouring from the tank's hatches. Then flame. Then the entire vehicle is burning. Ammunition cooking off inside, flames shooting from every opening. The crew never makes it out. The surviving German tanks, confused and suddenly cautious, begin pulling back. They can't see where the shot came from. They don't know how many anti-tank weapons the Americans have. The recoilless rifle crew has broken the attack with a single shot. Stories like this spread through the American forces. Soldiers start requesting these weapons, training on them, incorporating them into tactics. The recoilless rifle becomes something new in military doctrine, a squad-level tank killer. You don't need specialized anti-tank units anymore. Regular infantry squads can defend themselves against armor. But here's something that doesn't get talked about: the psychological impact this weapon had on German tank crews. If you want to discover more untold World War II stories and deadly hidden technologies, subscribe now, because what you're about to see next about how this weapon changed the minds of enemy commanders will blow your mind. German after-action reports from late 1944 and early 1945 start mentioning a new American weapon, something that kills tanks from unexpected ranges and positions. Tank commanders become cautious, reluctant to advance without extensive infantry support to clear out potential ambush positions. The mere presence of recoilless rifles starts affecting German tactical decisions. This is psychological warfare at its finest. The weapon doesn't just destroy tanks. It makes tank commanders afraid to move aggressively, slows down their advances, forces them to use more conservative tactics. And in warfare, hesitation kills momentum. The Pacific theater tells a different story, but one that's equally revealing. American forces island-hopping across the Pacific don't face many tanks. Japanese armor is lighter and less prevalent. But they face something arguably worse: fortified positions. Concrete bunkers, caves turned into machine gun nests, defensive positions built into coral and rock that are nearly impossible to destroy with conventional weapons. The M20 recoilless rifle becomes a bunker buster. Crews can set up at medium range, safe from small arms fire, and systematically destroy fortified positions one by one. The shaped charge warheads, designed to penetrate tank armor, turn out to be devastatingly effective against concrete. The shells punch through walls that would stop conventional artillery, detonate inside the bunker, and eliminate the position. On Okinawa, recoilless rifle crews support infantry assaults by taking out defensive positions that have held up American advances for days. Positions that would normally require airstrikes or sustained artillery bombardment are neutralized by a few well-placed shots from weapons carried by a small team. This versatility, the ability to kill tanks, destroy fortifications, and provide mobile fire support, makes the recoilless rifle incredibly valuable. It's not a specialized tool, it's a problem solver. But the weapon isn't perfect. It has limitations and quirks that soldiers learn the hard way. The backblast, as mentioned, is dangerous to the crew if they're not careful. But it's also a massive tactical signature. At night, firing a recoilless rifle looks like a volcano erupting. The flash of flame from the rear can be seen for miles, which means if you fire at night, you better be ready to move immediately, because every enemy soldier in the area knows approximately where you are. The ammunition is bulky and heavy. Each 75mm shell weighs around 15 pounds. A crew can only carry a few rounds, which means extended engagements require resupply. Soldiers learn to make every shot count, because running out of ammunition in the middle of a fight is a death sentence. The weapons themselves, while lighter than conventional anti-tank guns, are still awkward and cumbersome. The M20 is nearly 7 feet long. Try carrying a 7-foot tube through a dense forest or up a steep hillside while under fire. It's brutal, exhausting work. And there's another problem that takes longer to become apparent. The weapons wear out fast. The extreme temperatures and pressures inside the tube during firing gradually erode the metal. After a few hundred rounds, the tube can develop cracks, weak points, dangerous flaws. In combat, with no opportunity for careful inspection and maintenance, crews sometimes don't realize their weapon is damaged until it fails at the worst possible moment. There are documented cases of recoilless rifles suffering catastrophic failures during firing. The tube ruptures, explosive gases escape in all directions, and the crew is injured or killed by their own weapon. It's rare, but it happens often enough that soldiers develop superstitions about their weapons, careful inspection rituals, lucky shells that they save for emergencies. But despite these limitations, the fundamental concept proves so successful that it doesn't just last through World War II, it defines anti-tank warfare for decades. After the war ends, American military engineers continue developing recoilless rifle technology. They create new models, refine the designs, experiment with different calibers and ammunition types. The M67 recoilless rifle, introduced in the 1950s, becomes standard issue for American forces through the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and beyond. Other nations see the American weapons and immediately start developing their own versions. The Soviet Union creates the SPG-9, a recoilless gun that remains in service with dozens of armies worldwide today. China, Sweden, Germany, every major military power develops recoilless weapons because the basic concept is too effective to ignore. But here's what's truly remarkable. The same basic principles that made the M1 recoilless rifle effective in 1944 still work in modern warfare. Yes, the materials are better now. Yes, the ammunition is more sophisticated. Yes, modern weapons have targeting computers and thermal sights and all kinds of advanced features. But the core concept, directing explosive gases backward to eliminate recoil, creating a lightweight, man-portable weapon capable of killing armored vehicles, that concept remains unchanged. Modern anti-tank weapons like the Carl Gustaf recoilless rifle, still widely used by special forces and infantry units around the world, are direct descendants of the weapons American engineers created 80 years ago. The physics hasn't changed. The tactical advantages haven't changed. The basic idea is still sound. But let's dig deeper into the engineering, because there's a secret buried in the design of these weapons that even most military historians miss. Why does the recoilless rifle work so well when earlier attempts at similar weapons mostly failed? The answer lies in the Venturi nozzle at the rear of the weapon, and this is where the engineering becomes truly brilliant. Early recoilless designs, experiments from the First World War and the interwar period, simply had an open tube. Explosive gases could escape freely from both ends. This eliminated recoil, sure, but it also meant enormous waste of propellant energy. The weapons were horribly inefficient, requiring massive amounts of propellant to achieve even modest shell velocities. The breakthrough came from understanding fluid dynamics. Engineers realized that if you carefully control how the gases escape from the rear, you can optimize the system. The Venturi nozzle at the back of the M1 creates a controlled restriction. Gases don't just blast out freely. They're forced through a specific shape that maximizes the backward momentum while minimizing wasted energy. This means you can use less propellant to achieve the same shell velocity. Less propellant means less weight. Less weight means the weapon is more portable. More portable means infantry can actually use it effectively in combat. The whole system works because of this one brilliant piece of engineering that most people never notice. There's also something darker we need to discuss, something that military historians often gloss over, but combat veterans remember vividly. The recoilless rifle kills efficiently, but it also kills messily. When a shaped charge warhead penetrates a tank and detonates inside, the crew doesn't just die. They're incinerated, torn apart, vaporized. The inside of a tank hit by a recoilless rifle becomes an oven, a pressure cooker, a chamber of horrors that nothing human can survive. Soldiers who've used these weapons talk about what comes after the shot. The screaming that sometimes comes from damaged tanks, brief and terrible before it stops. The smell of burning flesh and fuel that carries across the battlefield. The knowledge that inside that burning metal coffin are young men, maybe teenagers, conscript soldiers who might have hated the war as much as you do, dying in agony. War is never clean. Weapons that kill efficiently are still instruments of death. And the soldiers who operated recoilless rifles, despite the tactical advantages and the lives these weapons saved on their own side, still carried the weight of what they'd done. There's a memoir from a recoilless rifle operator in the Korean War.
He describes killing a North Korean tank at close range, watching it burn, hearing the ammunition cooking off inside. And then, hours later, when his unit advanced past the destroyed tank, he made the mistake of looking inside through a blast hole. He writes that he couldn't eat meat for months afterward, that he still dreams about what he saw, decades later.
This is the reality of warfare that gets sanitized in technical discussions about effective range and penetration values. The recoilless rifle was a revolutionary weapon. It was also a killing machine that created unimaginable suffering for its targets. But from a purely military perspective, the weapon was an unquestioned success. It gave infantry unprecedented capability. It changed how armies thought about anti-armor defense. It influenced weapon development worldwide. And it proved that sometimes the most revolutionary advances come from thinking about problems in completely new ways. Commander Crosby, the Navy officer who championed the recoilless rifle concept, never became a household name. His obituary when he died in 1973 was a few paragraphs in military journals. Most people who've never served in the military have never heard of him. But his work saved thousands of lives, changed modern warfare, and created a weapon system that's still in use today. That's how military innovation actually works. Not through brilliant generals making dramatic speeches, but through obsessive engineers working on problems nobody else thinks are solvable, building prototypes in machine shops, running test after test until they prove that the impossible is actually possible. The recoilless rifle succeeded because it solved a real problem. Infantry needed tank-killing capability. They couldn't carry conventional anti-tank guns. Existing shoulder-fired weapons were inadequate. Someone needed to invent something new, and someone did. Let's talk about what happened to these weapons after World War II ended, because the story doesn't stop at VJ Day. Korea, 1950. American forces are once again facing enemy armor. This time, Soviet-built T-34 tanks operated by North Korean crews. The M20 recoilless rifle, now refined and improved based on lessons from World War II, becomes the primary anti-tank weapon for American infantry. At the Battle of the Pusan Perimeter, when North Korean forces nearly push UN forces into the sea, recoilless rifle teams are credited with destroying dozens of tanks, buying time for reinforcements to arrive. Vietnam presents a different challenge. The enemy rarely uses tanks in the jungle environment, but the recoilless rifles find new purposes. They become bunker busters, artillery pieces for fire support, weapons for destroying fortified positions in village defenses. The versatility that made them valuable in World War II makes them indispensable in the complex, unconventional warfare of Vietnam. And here's something fascinating. Even as technology advanced, even as guided missiles and sophisticated anti-tank systems were developed, the simple recoilless rifle remained relevant. Why? Because it's reliable, because it's simple enough for any soldier to learn, because it doesn't depend on electronics that can fail, batteries that can die, or complex systems that break down in harsh conditions. Modern conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan saw Allied forces still using recoilless rifles for certain missions. When you need something that absolutely will work, when you're in an environment where sophisticated systems are a liability, you go back to the basics. You go back to a weapon concept that's 80 years old because it still gets the job done. There's a lesson in that. Military technology doesn't always advance in a straight line from primitive to sophisticated. Sometimes the simple solutions remain the best solutions. Sometimes trying to add complexity just adds failure points. But let's return to the question that's been hanging over this entire story. What made the recoilless rifle truly revolutionary? What separates it from just being a clever weapon and makes it something that changed warfare? The answer is democratization of firepower. Before the recoilless rifle, anti-tank capability was specialized.
centralized, limited to dedicated units with expensive equipment and extensive training. A normal infantry squad facing a tank was helpless, dependent on calling for support from artillery or dedicated tank destroyer units. The recoilless rifle gave that power directly to infantry squads. It flattened the hierarchy of capability. Suddenly, any soldier with training could potentially kill a tank. That fundamentally changed tactics, changed how armies organized, changed what was possible on the battlefield. This same pattern, taking a specialized capability and making it accessible to regular troops, defines most revolutionary weapons. The crossbow gave peasants the ability to kill knights in plate armor. The rifle gave ordinary soldiers accuracy that previously required master marksmen. The recoilless rifle gave infantry the ability to kill tanks. Each time this happens, warfare changes. The old hierarchies break down. New tactics emerge, and the side that adapts fastest tends to win. American forces adapted extremely quickly. By the end of World War II, the recoilless rifle was integrated into standard infantry doctrine. Squad tactics incorporated anti-armor procedures. Training programs taught every infantryman basic recoilless rifle operations. The weapon went from experimental curiosity to standard equipment in less than a year. That rapid adoption is itself remarkable. Military organizations are notoriously resistant to change, bound by tradition and established doctrine. The fact that recoilless rifles were accepted so quickly speaks to how desperately they were needed and how obviously effective they were once deployed. Now, here's something most people don't know. The recoilless rifle almost didn't make it to frontline troops in time to matter in World War II. Development was slow. Skeptics in the military hierarchy questioned whether the weapons would work in combat conditions. Production was delayed by material shortages and competing priorities. The first significant shipments reached Europe until late 1944, when the war was already entering its final phase.
If the war had ended 6 months earlier, recoilless rifles would have been a footnote, an interesting experiment that never saw significant combat use. Instead, they arrived just in time for some of the war's most intense fighting: the Battle of the Bulge, the final push into Germany, and the island assaults in the Pacific. Timing matters. History turns on contingencies, on lucky breaks and close calls. The recoilless rifle could have been forgotten. Instead, it became legendary. And there's one more element to this story that deserves attention: the human factor. The crews who operated these weapons developed a culture, a shared identity, stories that bound them together. They called themselves reckless rifle crews, with a mix of pride and dark humor. They developed their own slang, their own procedures, their own superstitions. Some crews named their weapons. Some painted kill marks on the tubes, one mark for each tank destroyed. Some carried lucky charms, convinced that certain rituals before firing would ensure accuracy. This might seem silly, trivial details in the grand sweep of history. But it matters because it shows how soldiers adapt to new technology, how they make machines into something personal, something meaningful. The recoilless rifle wasn't just a tool. For the men who used it, it became part of their identity, a weapon they trusted with their lives. Veterans of World War II who operated recoilless rifles often stayed connected after the war ended. They formed associations, held reunions, shared stories. They felt they'd been part of something unique, pioneers using a revolutionary weapon that most soldiers never encountered. And they were right. They were pioneers. The tactics they developed, the procedures they established, the lessons they learned, all of that became doctrine that influenced how future generations of soldiers used recoilless weapons. Military manuals from the 1950s and 60s directly reference combat reports from World War II recoilless rifle crews. The experiences of soldiers in the Ardennes forest or on Pacific Islands shaped how the U.S. Army trained troops for Korea and Vietnam.
That's legacy. That's how innovation actually spreads, not through official channels and policy papers, but through the accumulated knowledge of people who actually used the equipment in life and death situations. So, what's the final verdict on the M1 recoilless rifle? What's the true significance of this shock-free weapon that turned tanks into fireballs? It proved that physics can be outwitted if you're clever enough. It demonstrated that the most revolutionary weapons often come from questioning fundamental assumptions. It showed that giving ordinary soldiers extraordinary capabilities can change the nature of warfare itself. Most importantly, it saved lives. American soldiers who would have been helpless against enemy armor suddenly had a fighting chance. Attacks that would have been suicidal became possible. Defensive positions that would have been overrun could hold against armored assault. There's no accurate count of how many American soldiers survived because recoilless rifles destroyed enemy tanks that otherwise would have killed them. There's no way to quantify how many attacks succeeded, how many defensive lines held, how many battles were won, because infantry suddenly had tank-killing capability. But the impact was real, measurable in the testimony of soldiers who were there, who saw what these weapons could do, who lived to come home because a recoilless rifle crew destroyed the tank that would have killed them. That's the true measure of a weapon's success. Not the technical specifications, not the theoretical capabilities, but the human lives saved, the missions accomplished, the difference made when everything was on the line. The M1 recoilless rifle and its descendants made that difference. For 80 years and counting, this weapon concept has been protecting soldiers, destroying enemy armor, and proving that sometimes the best solution is the one that breaks all the rules. Commander Crosby's crazy idea, let the explosive gases escape backward, eliminate recoil through clever engineering, give infantry a weapon they can actually use, that crazy idea became a cornerstone of modern military doctrine. And somewhere in a conflict zone right now, there's probably a soldier shouldering a recoilless rifle, a weapon whose basic design hasn't changed in 8 decades, preparing to engage a target just like soldiers did in the forests of Belgium in 1944. Some ideas are just too good to become obsolete. Some solutions are so fundamentally sound that no amount of technological advancement can improve on the basic concept. The recoilless rifle is one of those ideas. Simple, effective, deadly, and revolutionary. A weapon that turned shock-free operation into a tactical advantage, turned infantry squads into tank killers, and turned one brilliant engineer's obsession into a system that changed warfare forever. If you loved discovering the deadly secrets of the M1 recoilless rifle and how it revolutionized anti-tank warfare, make sure to subscribe. We're uncovering more hidden truths about World War II's most innovative weapons, the engineering breakthroughs, the desperate innovations, and the brilliant minds that created tools of war that still influence military technology today. A new video revealing even more secrets is coming very soon, and you won't want to miss it. Because the history of warfare isn't just about who won or lost. It's about the moments when someone looked at an impossible problem and refused to accept that it couldn't be solved. It's about engineers who broke the rules, soldiers who trusted their lives to untested weapons, and ideas that were too revolutionary to fail. The M1 recoilless rifle was born from that kind of desperate innovation. And its legacy lives on every time a soldier shoulders a modern recoilless weapon and knows that when they pull the trigger, the weapon won't move, the target won't survive, and the physics that everyone said couldn't be cheated just got outwitted one more time.